So there we go, the 2019 season is done. And it's been a lot of fun actually, analysing some really great races. There's been some good scraps, some controversial decisions, some brilliant overtakes as well on the way. And for me, my personal highlight has probably been the German Grand Prix. It was the ultimate race of a bit of attrition, but so much drama the whole way through, so much to get wrong. But actually, analysing it, this was one where risk versus reward really was difficult, because the drivers that made mistakes were only an inch or so away from doing something right, and it was just small errors that really cost them. We had Lewis Hamilton hit the wall from the lead of the race, but what he does do is just give it a little hint of throttle as he comes through this right-hand part of the chicane, which just accelerates him a little bit towards turn 16. Charles Leclerc as well. Look what happens now on the slick tyres. As soon as he turns in the oversteer and he's just braking away at the rear, no grip there. Once again gets onto the slippery stuff on the outside. Hamilton got going and had a big spin at turn 1, and then Valtteri Bottas should have been second or third place probably in that race. But he too, following Lance Stroll, trying to put pressure on the Racing Point man, and had a big spin, big crash. This shot here, this aerial shot, is a really nice one to illustrate the tiny margins that these drivers are fighting with in these conditions. So on the way into the corner, if I pause it, look where Lance Stroll is. He's on the curb on the entry, right on the left-hand side. He's just opening the corner on the entry. Now look where Bottas is. He's not using that curb, so he's got a bit of space that he could use that clearly is dry enough. It's tough to know when it is, because usually the curbs remain a little bit damp as well. So Stroll's braved it on that curb and he's got away with it. And if we go towards the exit here, Stroll now keeps entirely in the dry patch. Bottas is a little bit tighter on the entry because he's not on that curb. And if I pause it there, you can just see the left rear starts to get on that damp patch as he's burying in the throttle, trying to get on the power on the exit. And as soon as he touches that, he's just going round as a passenger. Yeah, it was a race that really, the finer details could truly be analysed and see exactly where mistakes were made, because in those conditions, you've got to stick really to the line. You've got to be so careful with all your application of the throttle, the brakes and everything. And some mistakes were really unfortunate because of the conditions, but they were quite clear to see. My favourite battle over the course of the season has probably been Leclerc and Verstappen. This one's been really dynamic. Leclerc, first season in a top team with a chance to win races and get poles. And he got a pole and should have won straight away in Bahrain, round 2. Did everything right, but had an engine issue in the closing stages. But then it was 8 races later in Austria, he gets another pole and again has a really great chance to take the win. But it was also a great chance for Max Verstappen. And it came to a head right in the closing stages. Leclerc, you can't leave the door that wide open. A few laps to go of the Grand Prix, you've got Verstappen bearing down on you for the win. You cannot wave him through and hope that you're going to get space. He shouldn't have given Verstappen the chance to run him off the road. That one is clear. Verstappen got away with it. Got away with it. Right on the edge, but probably just about acceptable. And actually, that was the first time that anyone had beaten the Mercedes, and it was the Red Bull of Verstappen. But what was interesting to see was Leclerc really learned from this. And the very next race at Silverstone, the two of them were battling again, and suddenly you could see that it switched in Leclerc. He was never going to be nice to Verstappen again. Verstappen tries to go all the way around the outside of Charles Leclerc at turn 4. Now for Max, of all the people he could have possibly been trying to overtake on the outside in this Grand Prix, it was never going to happen against Leclerc. After what happened in Austria, he was always going to be shown the outside. So lap 25, the final moment between these two. Verstappen's ahead. It's so committed, so aggressive. This was so personal between these two. And Leclerc keeps his foot in for the outside of the left, barges wheels with Verstappen on the right-hand side, and he's through. And look how wide he goes on the exit. He knows that what goes around comes around, basically. Verstappen forced him off last time. No need to leave his rival any space on the exit. And he didn't leave his rival any space, but Verstappen managed to keep his foot in on the runoff and come back on ahead. But finally in Japan, again the two of them, and this time Leclerc got it a bit wrong. People will say that Verstappen drove Leclerc off in Austria, which is true, but there's a subtle difference. Verstappen was at least alongside, maybe even slightly ahead of Leclerc. Here Leclerc was coming from a bit further back, launched in a bit and understeered into his rival. But actually, overall, I'm really excited about the pair of them. both on the podium in Abu Dhabi behind Lewis Hamilton. It was the old guard, 6-time champ Lewis Hamilton ahead of the new young pretenders. Verstappen's had an almighty season, but Leclerc as well, first year in Ferrari, the pressure and everything that comes with that. I think we've got a lot to look forward to from those two battling it out for the next decade or so. But the stewarding has been a big talking point this year, and it all started back in Canada. When Vettel went off from the race lead in Canada and he squeezed Lewis Hamilton to the wall, at the time I thought, that's not very good. This is going to be immediately a steward's investigation. And when the stewards gave a 5-second penalty, I thought, you know what, you can't argue with that. Vettel clearly went across the track, came back on, across the entire track and put Hamilton in the wall and kept the position like that. I actually still think the stewards got that one right, based on historical data, which you have to have. This incident is really very, very similar to the Vettel one. It's a mistake from Verstappen. He cut the corner, he had very low grip as he was rejoining the circuit, he had no grip as he was off it, came back on, understeered, he didn't oversteer, he understeered, there's a difference there, and he forces Raikkonen off. 5-second penalty. And to be honest, most people were saying that's a fair enough penalty. Now there's a very small difference between Verstappen's incident and Vettel's incident, so the stewards here have been consistent with their penalties. You can't crowd another driver off the circuit and you have to rejoin safely if you go off the track. So according to the rules, it was a penalty against Sebastian Vettel. The problem was, the backlash from that decision was so huge and the fans were in outcry because it denied everyone a great race between Vettel and Hamilton. And it was undoubtedly a shame. But after that, I think the stewards got themselves in a bit of a pickle with many big decisions that came. Austria, Verstappen and Leclerc. This one was probably the hardest one to analyse for me in the year. It's a really tough one, and I've looked at this so many times to try and see whether there's a penalty here or not for Verstappen. The rules state that you can't intentionally push another driver off the circuit. So the question is Verstappen's intentions, I think, firstly. Now, I think he's intentionally done it, but there's not a huge amount of evidence to support that. The steering, he is steering a pretty tight line. He does sort of relax the steering a little bit just to put Leclerc towards the outside curb. That's true, he could keep the steering tighter, but I don't think there's necessarily concrete evidence here that Verstappen is not just deeper into the corner, he's braked too late. Leclerc's always going to go wide. So it's a really tough one for the stewards. I would hate to be in their shoes for this Grand Prix. My feeling is that he did do it, and this is backed up by the fact that he's already gone through that corner side by side the lap before, and Leclerc held on around the outside. So Verstappen, psychologically, he knows he's just going to force his rival off. I've been there myself and I've done it. And the stewards can't necessarily tell the psychology of a driver. They can only decide based on what evidence is in front of them. So for me, Verstappen was probably leaning towards a penalty for that one because he forced Leclerc completely wide. He wasn't really ahead, maybe by a millimetre or something at the apex, but it was so close. And to be honest, not that fair, I would say, in that move. But I can see also why the stewards were lenient and gave him no penalty for that one, because that was just such a tough call to make. The big one that I really disagree with the stewards on is Monza still. If we go on board with Hamilton all the way through, you can see he's got a great slipstream from Leclerc. Leclerc covers the inside for the second chicane. Hamilton goes to the outside. They're pretty much neck and neck, side by side, and you've got to leave racing room. It's the #1 rule. In the braking area, you basically choose your line. And Leclerc decides to come across quite aggressively, and too aggressively, and clearly Hamilton's very close to touching Leclerc on one side. The other side, he drops the right-hand tyres onto the grass, no grip, and off he goes straight on. No way to make the corner. Now this one was a really strange decision because it's a very unethical piece of driving and quite different to Verstappen doing the same to Leclerc in Austria. Verstappen in Austria was on the exit of a corner where you can argue that your car's natural momentum is taking you there. You're not deliberately driving the other rival off. In Monza, Leclerc was on a straight line. There you have to always leave your rival a car's width. It's a little bit dangerous to force a rival onto the grass at that speed as well. Really big top speed, nearly 200 miles an hour. I thought immediately for that one, I thought that's a slam dunk 5-second penalty for Leclerc. We had it the year before with Verstappen and Bottas in Monza, turn 1, and it was a 5-second penalty. No one could really complain about it. But the stewards I think this came from all the backlash, particularly from Canada, where Ferrari lost a win and we all lost a race. Here, I think the stewards, they didn't want the same thing. They didn't want the backlash. I think the correct decision would have been a 5-second penalty for Leclerc, but it would have cost everyone a great race because we still had a lot of drama with Hamilton. Then Bottas ended up picking up the baton and taking the fight to Leclerc. No doubt a 5-second penalty there would have ruined a bit of the drama. So I still think in Monza that should be a 5-second penalty. Consistency is what the drivers really want. If one thing's a penalty, the next thing has to be a penalty for the same offence. And I think that's where there's difficulties that arose. Of course, around this time, the black and white flag was brought in, and that was the big umbrella that Michael Massey, the race director, said they waved it to Leclerc and that was enough. The black and white flag never came back, did it? So that was a bit of a strange one as well, and I think Leclerc really was let off the hook in that race. One of the most interesting relationships to watch over the course of the season has been at Ferrari. Charles Leclerc finally replaced Kimi Räikkönen in the team, and immediately the dynamic was intensified. When you've got a 4-time champ that's been comfortable with Räikkönen there, suddenly getting a new young pretender alongside him, there's big scrutiny. And this was a really changing dynamic over the course of the season. It started in Melbourne with Matteo Binotto saying in 50-50 incidents they'll always favour Vettel because they think he's going to be the stronger driver. And it made sense. He was the 4-time champion, he'd led their line for a few years. And there were team orders, quite a few early on, and generally they did favour Vettel, but you could understand largely why they were made in the interest of trying to get on terms with Mercedes. But actually over the course of the first half of the season, it was Charles Leclerc that emerged as the faster driver. He should have won already in Bahrain in round 2 when he defied team orders to overtake Vettel and go off, and should have won the race, but his engine failed on him. And then he went on that brilliant run of qualifying in the middle of the season, starting with Austria, and it took him right the way up to Monza, where he was on form. He'd just come off the back of his first win in Belgium. And I think for Vettel that must have been really, really tough. As the lead driver in the team, theoretically, having your young second-year driver beating you. Then the big one in Monza. Leclerc on provisional pole, Vettel held up his part of the bargain, towed Leclerc round. That was crucial in Monza. We know the rest of qualifying that was a bit crazy afterwards in Q3. But that was all because they're desperate for a slipstream. Now Leclerc should have done the same as Vettel on the second run. He needed to do that back, but he didn't. And that was the first controversial moment. It was Leclerc breaking team orders there and not repaying the favour to Vettel.
To push now. Yeah, tell him to come in front then.
But the very next race in Singapore, Leclerc on pole again, but the strategy then gave Vettel the big undercut and he won the race. It was the perfect bounce back for Seb. The very next race after that, Russia, again team orders used, and this time it was Seb that didn't give the place back to Charles.
And let Charles by. Tell him to close up.
Vettel's engine failed after he pitted, but the relationship was really, really on its edge. We had Mexico, where they were running 1-2 and Vettel just clipped the back of Leclerc as they had a little fight up towards turn 4. They both got away with that one, but they didn't get away with it 2 races later in Brazil. For this one, the outside shot shows a lot more clearly what's happened here. So if I pause it here, you can see Vettel is right on the white line, trying to go around his teammate. He's just about got enough space. Now, if I just let this go slowly through, you can see at the point of impact, now look where Vettel's car is. There's now a good 1.5 meters to his right-hand side. And look at the trajectory of the car as well. It's pointing towards the left-hand side of the track. He's really coming across on Leclerc, who's just held his ground, perhaps more than he should have done. And there's contact, damage for both cars, front right suspension for Leclerc, rear left puncture for Sebastian Vettel, both Ferraris out of the Grand Prix. Big controversy when teammates collide like that on a straight. It's unfathomable. And a lot of question marks. So that dynamic has really changed. Leclerc's come in, he's done a great job in his first year with Ferrari. Vettel, I have to say, has done a really good job as well in the end of the season, because there was a moment after Monza where you just thought, this is going really badly, this is getting out of control. But he picked himself up and he managed to take a really good pole position in Japan and really managed to get back towards Leclerc's level. But the two of them pushing each other on is good, the two of them fighting, not so good for the team, causing a lot of headaches, I think, for Matteo Binotto at the moment. And that, for next year, is going to be one of the critical dynamics in whether Ferrari can actually take the fight fully to Mercedes. They've got to stop the drivers warring. Finally, my favourite moment of the season. And This one has to be Brazil. Another great race, just behind Germany for me, but really great race. And it came from that Ferrari tangle. Suddenly there was a great chance for the midfielders to get on the podium. And Pierre Gasly held on to second, and what a year he's had. Not all good. The first half of it was really, really difficult in Red Bull. High hopes for him, and he just didn't quite work out for whatever reason. But since joining Toro Rosso, he's been really good. He's also had to cope with the death of Antoine Hubert, who was a close friend of his as well, so really difficult in that way as well. Hearing the scream of Gasly on the slowdown lap after he realised he got a shock second place was such a nice moment after the year he's had. Just about holding off the champion Lewis Hamilton as well on the run to the line. Really great stuff. But also from that race, the end of it gave Carlos Sainz a first podium as well. And what a year he's had. He really deserved that podium. He's driven phenomenally in the McLaren, first year with that team as well. But from the back of the field to the podium in a McLaren, holding off the Alfa Romeos at the end on really shod tyres. Really good stuff as well. And it ended up with a stat that in our 2019 field, 15 drivers have had a podium at one point. Only the rookies and the departing Nico Hülkenberg didn't manage it. That's a cool stat.